Welcome to the debate. Today, we are walking a very thin line. We're looking at a phenomenon that's pervasive in our circles, incredibly subtle, and, well, potentially destructive to the very path of awakening we're all trying to walk. It's a concept coined back in the 80s by the psychologist John Wellwood. It's called spiritual bypass.
A term, I might add, right out of the gate that has been weaponized quite a bit. It seems to be the favorite critique to hurl at anyone who prefers, the silence of the cushion to the endless noise of psychotherapy.
That is a fair opening shot, and yes, terms can be misused. But the definition we're working with today is pretty specific. Spiritual bypass describes the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep personal, emotional, unfinished business. It's using the Dharma not as a mirror, but a shield against our own humanity. So the central question is this: does the path to liberation require us to transcend our human emotions immediately? Is the Dharma a fire escape out of human experience? Or is the only way out actually through?
And I'm here to argue that the Dhamma is absolutely a way out. That's the explicit promise of the third noble truth, cessation. Nibbana is the cooling of the fires. We're trying to wake up from the dream of personality, not psychoanalyze the dream characters to make them happier. So I take the position that what you call bypassing is often just high-level renunciation. Focusing on messy feelings is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The ship is samsara, it is sinking, and we should be getting into the lifeboats, not fixing the upholstery.
And I'll argue that growing up is a prerequisite for waking up. If we don't heal the human vessel, our so-called awakening is fragile, distorted, and often just dissociation dressed in robes. We are debating spiritual bypass, the path through, not around.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really understand the mechanism here, we have to look at spiritual bypass as a kind of heart bypass. We're routing our attention around the pain rather than going through it. The source material uses a very evocative image here that I think grounds this whole discussion: the leaking roof.
I know this metaphor well. Yeah, walk us through it for anyone who might be new to it.
Imagine a student sitting in meditation. The roof of their house is leaking. Water is dripping, drip, drip, drip right onto the living room rug. Now, a person in conventional reality, they grab a bucket or call a roofer. But the spiritual bypasser sits next to the puddle, smiles serenely and thinks, the water is not me, the rug is a concept, there is no roof.
Okay, but let me push back on that immediately. Because in the context of deep practice, particularly vipassana, isn't that statement true? In the ultimate sense, the me that's worried about the rug is a fabrication of the mind.
In the ultimate sense, yes. But in the relative sense, the house is rotting. The rug is ruined. The student is sitting in a cold puddle calling it a lotus flower. My position is that this isn't high practice. This is avoidance. We're using the profound teachings of emptiness, of sunyata, to validate our refusal to deal with the actual mess of our lives. We simply cannot heal what we do not feel.
I see the logic, but you are prioritizing the preservation of the house, the ego, the personality, the story of me. But the Buddhist teaching in the fire sermon is that the house is on fire. Everything is burning. When the house is on fire, you don't stop to fix the plumbing or dry out the rug, you get out.
But we are still in the body. We are still in relationships.
For now. But if we obsess over our wounds and our trauma, aren't we just solidifying the very self-view we're trying to dismantle? If I spend 10 years healing my inner child, I spent 10 years reinforcing the illusion that there's an I who was hurt. I would argue that what you call bypassing is actually the necessary muscularity of equanimity. We look at the pain, we see it as anatta, not self, and we turn away from it. To dive into the personal story is a distraction. It turns the Dhamma into mere psychotherapy, and it keeps people trapped in the story of my pain forever.
That's a compelling argument. And it's exactly why this trap is so seductive. It sounds like high Dhamma, it looks like it. But I want to bring in a crucial concept from the Alagadupama Sutta, the snake simile. Because even the Dhamma itself can be dangerous if it's held wrongly.
The classic warning, the water snake.
The Buddha warned that the Dhamma is like a water snake. If you grasp it by the tail, it'll whip around and bite you. You have to grasp it by the neck. The bite here
in our context, is what I'd call spiritual gaslighting.
That's a very loaded modern term. Gaslighting implies a perpetrator and a victim. Who is gaslighting whom in the silence of their own meditation?
We are gaslighting ourselves. We use the truth as a weapon against our own hearts. So let's say a practitioner feels agonizing grief. Maybe they've lost someone or a job, they're going through a divorce. The right grasp of the snake acknowledges the suffering. This is grief. It hurts. I have to hold this with compassion. The wrong grasp, the bypass, says, there is no self to be sad. Who is grieving? This pain is an illusion.
But again, I have to play the devil's advocate here, because this is the real crux of it. The pain is an illusion, is a valid insight in the wisdom traditions. If we don't apply the absolute view that this grief is empty of inherent existence, don't we stay stuck in the relative view forever? When do we actually get to play the absolute card? If I'm feeling sad and I remind myself that I am a construct, that usually helps. Is that gaslighting or is that liberation?
Well, it depends on whether you're using that truth to digest the emotion or just to repress it. You can't stand on the absolute rung of the ladder without climbing the relative rungs first. To tell a grieving heart there is no self is an act of violence against your own experience. It's like having a broken leg. You can say this bone is a concept all day long. You can say pain is emptiness. But if you try to walk on it, you will fall. The bone needs a cast, not a sermon on emptiness. Spiritual gaslighting makes us doubt our own reality. It makes us think our human feelings are a failure of practice rather than the raw material of practice.
I worry that this approach just coddles the ego. If the snake bites, maybe it's waking us up. But, okay, let's look at how this plays out with specific teachings. Because I think you're dismissing the utility of these tools. You seem to suggest we should just wallow in the relative. Take karma, for instance.
Go on.
If I'm depressed or I'm in a difficult situation, the teaching of karma helps me accept it. It is my past action bearing fruit. I accept it without complaint. That's dignity. That is taking responsibility.
Or that's what I call the karma blame game. It is the classic error of the two arrows. The Buddha taught that the first arrow is the pain of life, the depression, the loss. That's inevitable. But when you use karma to say, I deserve this, so I must just sit here and take it, you are stabbing yourself with a second arrow. You're adding judgment to the pain.
So we just ignore the law of cause and effect?
No, we reframe it. Karma is not just a trap from the past, it is a steering wheel for the present moment. The point of power is now. Bypassing uses karma to stay passive and fatalistic. Oh, well, my karma is to be in an abusive relationship. No. Your karma is the opportunity to stand up and leave. You're bypassing your own agency.
Fair enough. I can see how fatalism can masquerade as acceptance. But let's move to a bigger gun. Impermanence. Anicca. This is the bedrock of insight. Why get worked up over feelings that are transient? If anger arises, I know it'll pass. If I give it attention, if I honor it as you suggest, I'm making it solid. I'm feeding the demon. Why not just let it float by?
Because ignoring the cloud often turns it into a storm. That's the impermanence dismissal. It can be very cold. Oh, you're sad? Don't worry, it'll pass. It dismisses the reality of the suffering right now. But, and this is crucial, there's a beautiful way to frame this that avoids the bypass.
And what is that?
We don't use impermanence to dismiss the feeling. We use it to find capacity. Because things are transient, it gives us the courage to befriend unpleasant feelings.
Courage? How so?
Well, think about it. If you thought a feeling of terror or deep grief was going to last forever, you'd have to push it away. It would be too overwhelming. But because we know it's anicca, because we know it's impermanent, we can say, okay, I can stand in this fire because I know it will burn out. We can hold the grief, we can hold the terror, specifically because we know they won't last. The transience is what makes it safe to feel. It's not an excuse to look away, it's the permission to look closely.
That is a subtle but powerful distinction. I can see the value in that. It turns impermanence into a container, not an exit door. But I still have to bring up equanimity. This is a Brahma Vihara. We're taught to be like the earth, like a stone, unmoved by the wind and rain. If I'm weeping and wailing, I am certainly not displaying equanimity.
You're describing the near enemy of equanimity.
In Buddhist psychology, every virtue has a near enemy, a state that looks like the virtue but is actually a disconnect. The near enemy of equanimity is indifference.
Indifference and equanimity can look identical from the outside. A poker face is a poker face.
But they feel completely different from the inside. There's a huge difference between a stone and a wise human being. A stone is cold. It doesn't feel the rain. Is that our goal? To be a rock? To be a zombie?
The goal is to be unshaken, to be free from dukkha.
Unshaken, yes. Unfeeling, no. The true image of equanimity isn't a stone. It's a grandmother watching her grandchild play. If the child falls, the grandmother doesn't panic, she is steady, but she also doesn't say the child is an illusion. She picks the child up, she offers warmth. It's an open palm that feels everything, the grit, the heat, the cold, but grabs nothing. Bypassing is a closed fist or a hand that refuses to touch the world at all.
I want to pivot to the practitioners themselves, because you mentioned that this happens to the good students.
It's not the lazy students who bypass, it's the diligent ones. Take the trauma survivor. For someone with a history of physical or sexual abuse, the body feels like a crime scene. It's a house of pain. So when the Dhamma says, "You are not your body," that acts like a winning lottery ticket. They grab that teaching to dissociate, to float above the trauma. It feels like liberation, but it's actually flight.
A valid concern. And then there's the dependent type.
The people pleaser. They use the concept of surrender or letting go to avoid setting boundaries. They call it letting go of ego or being of service, but really it's just codependency with a holy name. They're bypassing the hard work of individuation.
And the depressed type, this is perhaps the most dangerous intersection. They use shunyata, or emptiness, to validate their nihilism. They say, nothing matters anyway, it's all empty, and they're effectively spiritualizing their clinical depression. They mistake the void of depression for the void of wisdom. And the avoidant?
The avoidant type fears intimacy, so they use non-attachment as a wall. They aren't unattached in a Buddhist sense. They're isolated. They say, I have no attachments, but really they mean, I need no one. They confuse autonomy with detachment.
This is a bleak picture. If we are these types, and frankly most of us fall into one of these buckets, what do we do? If I'm a trauma survivor and I go to the cushion and I dissociate, are you saying I shouldn't meditate?
I'm saying we must apply the earth principle. We have to stabilize and normalize before we try to transcend. We need a warm blanket, not a cold camera.
Explain that. What is the cold camera?
The cold camera is that judging mind, watching the breath, analyzing distractions, cold and clinical. For a trauma survivor, that feels like scrutiny. It can trigger more anxiety. It feels like an interrogation.
And the warm blanket?
The warm blanket is self-compassion. It's the ability to say, I am feeling terror right now, and wrap that feeling in kindness rather than analysis. We use the phrase, name it to tame it. There is a tight fist of fear in my stomach.
But here is where I struggle. You're advocating for dualism here. I am watching the fear. You're strengthening the observer. Isn't the whole point to dissolve the observer, to realize there is no watcher?
Yes, but you have to have a healthy eye before you can let go of it. You can't deconstruct a house that hasn't been built yet. If you try to deconstruct a pile of rubble, you just get dust. You need a functioning self-construct to practice the Dhamma. You need the discipline to sit, the ethics to act, the wisdom to discern. If your sense of self is fragmented by trauma, you don't need emptiness yet. You need integration.
I listen to you and I find myself resisting because it feels like we are stepping backward. But then I look at the results in the community. I have known practitioners who can sit for 10 hours, but cannot have a difficult conversation with their spouse. I have known monks who speak of infinite compassion, but are cold to the person serving them tea.
That's the leaking roof. That's the bypass.
I suppose I have to concede that point. While I still hold that the ultimate view, the view of emptiness and anatta, is the medicine, I can see how administering that medicine too early, or to the wrong part of the psyche, is poison. It seems I've been arguing for the view from the mountaintop, while ignoring the trek required to get there.
And the trek is muddy. It involves tears and therapy and uncomfortable conversations. It involves being human.
Indeed. It seems quite possible to sit in a puddle and call it a lotus. And if I'm honest, my resistance to dealing with the mess is likely because the mess is uncomfortable. It's much more pleasant to be empty than to be sad.
It is. But we can't reach heaven without standing on earth. The path is roots before branches. Grow first, awaken later.
Roots before branches. I like that image. It suggests the stability of our human life supports the flowering of our spiritual life. They aren't enemies.
They're deeply interconnected. The test of our practice is not how high we can fly or how long we can sit. The test is how well we can land. How do we treat the cashier? How do we treat our own grief?
So we put down the cold camera. We stop trying to gaslight our own pain with absolute truths. We pick up the warm blanket.
Precisely.
It's a humbling prescription, but probably the one I needed. I'd revisit the snake metaphor one last time to synthesize this.
Go on.
The tail is using practice to hide from life. That is the cold camera, the indifference, the gaslighting. It's an act of fear. The neck, the correct grasp, is using practice to face life with courage. It is the ability to look at the leaking roof, acknowledge the water, feel the wet rug, and yet maintain a spaciousness that allows for repair.
But facing it means feeling it. Really feeling it. Not just noting sadness until it goes away, but allowing the heart to break open.
Yes. The goal is not to be a statue. The Buddha was not a statue. He was a living, breathing human being who was fully awake. He felt physical pain. He encountered difficulty. He dealt with schisms in his community. But he met it all with total presence. So perhaps the test of our practice isn't how peaceful we look, but how fully we can inhabit our humanity without being drowned by it.
To close, I want to leave our listeners and us with the question from our source material, a question to ask every time we practice. Is my practice helping me to hide from my life, or is it giving me the courage to finally meet it?
Meeting it, that's the real challenge.
Thank you for joining the debate.
See you next time.